so now we can go on to a Stephen King short story that I could have talked about a few years ago when we first did this whole uh, segment with the Stephen King short stories and their screen adaptations. But there was another one that I sort of bounced over a little bit. And I feel like I don't remember exactly why, but there's at least a few reasons it could have been. The idea that the short story is called Trucks, which obviously was adapted into Maximum Overdrive by King himself. But there was also that TV movie that was actually called Trucks, that also came out, and we'll talk about that kind of towards the end, just really briefly. But I feel like another reason I probably avoided it or went around it was it just seemed like a lose-lose, because Maximum Overdrive actually has quite a bit of a fan base of its own going on. And despite me being this King fanatic, where we just talk about his work as much as we possibly can on this channel, and it's one of my favorite things to talk about on this channel. With that being said, Maximum Overdrive being the only movie he directed on top of adapting it himself, I'm one of the people that lands in the camp. Well, when I first saw it, I was probably like in my early teens, maybe, or maybe in the 12 area, and I just really hated it. Like, I just didn't think it had any redeeming factors. I thought it was just dumb as fuck, and there was just absolutely nothing that I liked about it at all. I considered it one of the worst movies I had ever seen, one of my least favorite, and I just had nothing good to say about it. So, add that on top of the fact that the movie actually does have a fan base. So, I was kind of talking about it with a friend, like last year or a couple years ago, and she had just rewatched it, and that kind of got me curious of what would I think of it now. So I did go back to it, and it did have quality. It wasn't a completely irredeemable experience. Like, there are things in here where it's like, I can get why this has a fan base, and there's a very specific kind of, like, fun quality to it. Even if it's, it's really just objectively not a good movie, and King will be the first person to tell you that. I saw the interview with Emilio Estevez recently where he talked about how King, like, wrote him a letter or sent him some kind of message just, like, apologizing. And so, that makes sense. It all sort of makes sense, all the reputation that this has, which is just all over the place, which makes sense because, needless to say, the movie is quite all over the place all in itself. So, I guess before we go on, we can talk about Trucks, the story, which is very short. It's like maybe 10 pages of this book, 10 or 12, and there is something. It's interesting that the movie is the way that it is, because this story is something, like, really dark and really bleak, and even has, like, this sort of underlying tragedy in some parts of it. And I like the idea that, as far as I remember, there's no real explanation, and there's no explanation to the point that I think there's even a line where it talks about thinking about it too much, how this could be happening literally drives you insane. And so, I like the concept of that, much more so than, like, The Comet or whatever. And the fact that we basically start in the aftermath of a lot of carnage that's happened. Like, there's already bodies and cars all littered outside of the truck stop, and we're just getting it from the point of view of this one character. And there's a very small select group still here and still alive, and watching them kind of try to come to terms with something so insane happening on top of just trying to survive. And when you think about how we've talked about King being able to just make anything into a monster or anything scary, and it's like when you think of, trucks that have come to life, like, there is something, generally intimidating about a big truck, especially if you're, like, on the road with it, because they are, big and loud and potentially deadly if you're reckless around it or they're reckless around you or whatever. But the way King actually describes them to make them sound like monsters in this small paragraph here where it says, outside all the headlights suddenly popped on in unison, bathing the lot in an eerie, depthless glare. Growling, they cruised back and forth. The headlights seemed to give them eyes. In the growing gloom, the dark trailer boxes looked like the hunched, squared-off shoulders of prehistoric giants. That description alone, that's something that obviously is one of the many things that has made King the master that he is being able to just take everyday objects and make them sound like that. And it can be quite terrifying sounding. So there's definitely something in there, because you can watch Maximum Overdrive and say the whole concept is a bit stupid. But it's like, if you actually like see King's words on the page and the descriptions, that creates something else entirely, like a whole different kind of experience. But like we were saying, with that being said, the fact that he did adapt Maximum Overdrive himself and direct it, it is just interesting what the movie became. It's also interesting that there's more, I'm pretty sure there's a lot more characters in the movie, at the truck stop and the diner and all that. And what's interesting is there being more characters actually kind of starts to make it feel like, in some cases, another one of his stories with The Mist, where you have them all trapped in this one place and everything's just out there and they have to decide how they're going to do that. And so, like, I don't really get much Mist vibes from the story itself. It's more so watching the movie, interestingly enough. But, but throwing in those details where I was talking about, there was also like a sort of tragedy to the story, where you have stuff like when they talk about the body starting to draw flies, and it's like, I think that's mentioned in the movie, but when you read it in the book, there is something that's it's very horrific, but also there's something sad and tragic about it. And like something just makes everything more dire. And then there's the moment when Snodgrass is the name of the salesman in the story, when he has been hit and he's laying out there, and there's the moment in the story when he's starting to yell for help, and they basically, it's night and everybody else is kind of sleeping, so it's like just our narrator and like the girl that's there, and they just they have no choice but to just listen to him die. Like, they just have to wait for it, because they can't do anything about it or they'll get killed also. And the way the movie turns that into a couple of things, where it's like, it actually does turn into some sort of rescue mission, where it's like, in the story, he, like, you know, points to her boyfriend and says, like, if you wake up, he's gonna go out there and try to rescue him, and then he's gonna get killed, and that's what you don't want. So they just listen to him die until it's over. And the salesman character is such a sort of disgusting piece of shit in Maximum Overdrive. It's like, when he starts yelling for help, it's almost like, oh fuck, is this guy still alive? Really? Like, oh god, just die already. And it's like, it's a character that you don't mind seeing go. And so there's not going to have that scary sort of tragedy to it, of having to listen to a human being, like, pass away in terror. So that's a pretty big example of the difference between how it looks on the page and how it feels on the page, and whatever the hell the tone of Maximum Overdrive is. So there's that, and just the whole bleak, pessimistic outlook that the story has, where it basically ends with them having to pump all the gas, and the narrator having these visions of, like, all of the world is paved, so there's nowhere they can't go, and they take over, and we become enslaved, and it's their Earth now, and the idea of him seeing, like, a jet in the sky, and it's like, that's probably all on its own also, and it's just this really, really bleak ending to the story. So, taking that and seeing what he did here, now, of course, obviously, the big thing is, the story I'd always heard for the longest time was him being, like, coked out of his mind. But I suppose it could be both, but I feel like a lot of the stories you hear nowadays are saying it was a drinking thing. Estevez in that same interview said that he could smell the booze on the set. And so, whatever it may be, it's clear that this movie came from some sort of substance abuse. And maybe, that's where part of the fun quality comes from. Maybe. Because we do have this opening sequence, and as we go into the opening sequence, I'm sure it should be mentioned. One of the first things that should be mentioned is when you talk about the dark, bleak pessimism of the story we just talked about, and what sort of sound musically might come to mind when you think of a story that dark and bleak and pessimistic, and just naturally you're going to go to a full and complete AC/DC soundtrack, right? That's, But, okay, so there's that, and you've got, our main antagonist, I guess, with the Green Goblin truck, and it's like, okay, right away, he lets us know right away this is gonna be a totally different tone, so that's okay, to go a completely different direction. Once you get some sort of, inebriated vision of whatever this could be. Okay, and like I said, we do get the comet explanation, so there's that. But then, it's actually this really good opening sequence during the opening credits, when we see all the different machinery going insane, and the chaos as it breaks out, right at the start here. The first thing we see is, the sign over the bank saying, "fuck you," and then King himself being the guy at the ATM that gets called an asshole by the ATM. And then it just escalates, and we get this bridge sequence, and we get just everything going into chaos, and we see, the vending machines going off, and we see the arcade taking out Giancarlo Esposito, the electric knife, and it's all this chaos is really, it actually gives off this vibe that we're just being dropped into insanity, where we talked about, in the story when they say trying to think about it too much literally drives you insane. It's this is you post that insanity. This is what you're seeing. So there's something there to that, I suppose. And it just seeming to want to have a lot of fun with itself. And talking about the music and the score, I guess you could call it, where we have these moments that break out where I've actually heard people that say when they grew up with this movie and, they were kids and stuff like that, that it was terrifying, despite how campy it is to them now, obviously. And I can get that, because, bad things happen to kids. The one kid gets plowed on the baseball field. That's probably traumatizing for a kid to see at a young age, for sure, on top of everything else. But then you throw in, when I was talking about the music, when these things really take off, we get what I can only describe as a rock version of the Psycho shower music. And it's maybe that's another thing where it's as a kid, and when you see this context, and you take movies and imagery in a different way, I could imagine this being, terrifying from a certain point of view, but yeah, it's not one of those things that your mind will ever revert back to once you've seen it, as you might see it today. It's very, so, once you basically decide this is what this movie is, this is what the tone is, you can decide if you're gonna run with it, or if you're gonna think it's dreadful. And, like I said, I envy the people that can, really, really go with it, because while I don't see it as completely unwatchable or anything like that, like I might have said back when I first saw it. It's an experience that kind of asks a lot of you as far as certain kind of thresholds, I guess. But as far as moments that do sort of genuinely work, I like the sort of tonal curveball with the vending machine and the coach at the baseball field. When the vending machine goes out and it's throwing out the cans, and the first one hits him in the balls, and it's this Three Stooges comedy moment, and it's what is this? And then the second one comes out and hits him in the head. And it's like, what is this comedy skit? But then the next time we see that coach, he is absolutely dead and has this massive bloody hole in his head, or on his head, from the can. And that's when it shows you, like, oh no, this is like actually literally deadly. Of course, right after this is when the kid gets run over by the plow. But yeah, that initial moment where it's like this sort of silly comedy bit until we realize, oh shit, the guy is quite dead. Is that, like, that's the sort of thing where I could see, like, if maybe it had embraced that more, of, like almost seeming like it was really having, because it was really having fun with that angle of the fact that these are actual gruesome deaths happening, because once we get into it, it does feel like it's very sort of melodramatic when we get to the deaths. Like, it's one of those things where I would say the movie's intentional parody if it weren't for the fact that we don't quite know where King's mind was when he was seeing this in his head, because there's a lot of things in here where you get the vibe that he probably was thinking he was making something legitimately awesome. And so when you see these moments with, like, you know, acting that's practically parody level, and any sort of character work they try to do, when none of it's really there. Like, as far as, like, relationships go, like, there's, Emilio Estevez's character, and there's the character Brett. And this sort of weird romance blooms, I guess. But the thing about it is, like, any time they have scenes together, it might as well be intermission. Like, who seriously gives a fuck about any of it? And it makes a movie that's this insane shockingly dull when they try to do anything remotely character related. And there's the father-son thing between Duncan and Deke, where it's like, we have the one side of it where Duncan has to get to his kid and then gets, like, immediately killed, and then the other side of it where Deke is desperately trying to get to his dad, who we know is dead, and it's like, there could be something there, but it's so paper thin and is only something we are thinking about in the moments that those are happening. It's another thing where it's like, I think he was trying to add some sort of gravity here, believe it or not. And it's really just sort of not coming through. So, and not to mention when Estevez starts, like, philosophizing about what this could possibly be. Is it aliens with a broom wiping out the human race or whatever? And it's like, just everything feels like parody. It could be one of those movies that feels like it's intentionally parody of the monster movies of, like, the 50s or something like that. Something tongue-in-cheek, like Killer Clowns or something. But I don't feel like that's what it was going for. I feel like he actually was trying to balance. Because we know King can make really great character studies inside his horror. We've talked about that so many times, where it's like, the horror is really just representing the human element of most of his stories, and his books. So I feel like there was probably a genuine attempt here that was just really falling apart in all of the mess that this movie was going on and making. Because you have the moment, God, it's a very effective moment in the story when one of the characters starts to snap under pressure and has just a very brief outburst. Just very brief, that's immediately pulled in, because once again, if you outburst, you're going to die. So, in the midst of this, she says, "They can't do this, we made them." And that's it. Okay? And it's like, it's a big moment in the story, because it's this, like, you can just feel reality coming apart. But it has to be hushed, and it has to be pushed to the side to survive. The movie has turned this into, I don't even think I have to elaborate, assuming you've seen the movie, what they did with this very effective moment in the story, where a character snaps and realizes, they can't do this, we made them. God bless this actress, whoever she is, for just going for it. not only that, going for it twice. It's it's not exactly this big, profound moment in the movie, to say the least. But I'll say that. Offering my condolences to the actress and how hard she tried is my way of saying how I feel about those moments. And same thing for Yardley Smith, who's like, you know, bless her, she's doing what she was told to do. Because when I was talking about there are other, you know, actually effective sequences, like these individual sequences when we're outside of the truck stop, like when we have the newlyweds having to fend for themselves until they get there, with these various rogue vehicles that are coming after them, and it's like, it's interesting to see that, but it's also, of course, they had to make one of the characters as annoying as they made Connie, the recent bride. And it's like, that sort of takes away from how much it would otherwise work to have these characters individually on their own out here. With that being said, I do have to say that by far, far and away, with no competition whatsoever, the best sequence in this movie is when Deke is going through the neighborhood and he's being stalked by the ice cream truck. That is a genuinely great sequence. Where he's going through the neighborhood and there's like all the carnage that's been left behind. There's this bloody lawnmower and the sprinklers are coming on by themselves and he's going between them and then being stalked around by that ice cream truck. It's a really fantastic sequence. It's brief. It's maybe too brief. I would have loved some more suspense there because it was working. And that's something where it's like, there are moments in this that are genuinely good and could work if he had kind of gone more for that. Needless to say, we are going to get bigger and bigger and bigger as it goes. And there's times where you can say, like, oh my god, this is so incredibly silly to the point that I feel actively dumber as it goes on. But there's also cases where it's like, when it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, I do appreciate certain aspects of it also. Like, even though it's kind of silly, I like the concept of having to, like, try to outsmart the gun that comes in and all that stuff. And I also really love the just full destruction climax, where we see, like, basically the end of the truck stop. And it's like, because here's the thing, is when we're talking about movies now that just feel really fake and artificial, regardless of the quality of the rest of the movie, there's something about going back to these movies in the 80s and the 70s and stuff like that, where things were just really happening, where they were just really blowing shit up, and cars were really crashing into each other and being thrown around, and just all this carnage of stuff that you're actually watching happen that was just filmed being just destruction. And it's like I said, regardless of any movie's quality that has this stuff in it, just seeing real shit crashing and blowing up in a movie is always going to be great, especially now. So that's something about this movie in particular I can really appreciate. It's like, all the stuff you're watching is actually stuff crashing into each other and blowing up, and that's super fun. So, like I said, especially in times like this, you can really, really appreciate something like that. So, then, with that said, we do get to this extremely underwhelming climax. After all this craziness and all the crazy directions it could have possibly gone, we do get just one more segment where they have one more, you know, there's always the one last antagonist with the Green Goblin truck and the, them having to get on the boat and get out of here. So, we have a very, very abrupt end to this, you might say, iconic Green Goblin truck, where he just says, "Adios, motherfucker," and fires at it, and it blows up. And that's it. It's not particularly satisfying as a climax for an antagonist that actually was set up to be something kind of cool. Despite everything going on here, it was just like, okay, I think we're done. We spent all of our stuff on the full destruction of the truck stop. We just got to use what little we have left to end the movie. So that's why we get, you know, a bunch of text that tells us, oh, by the way, everything was fine after we passed out of the comet. And Connie informs us that she's going to woof her cookies, and that is the final line of dialogue that takes us into the end credits. And AC/DC takes us out, as it brought us in. It brought us into this world and it took us out. So, yeah. There's things in here that, you know, like I said, I can get where the fan base exists. I can get why it's there, especially if you like something that just seems like it's descending into madness like this is, I guess. But it's still definitely more on the some of it is too dumb to even be enjoyed angle. But it is a movie that kind of feels like it's all its own, and you're gonna get, you know, a big reaction one way or the other when you drop its name, depending on who you're talking to. And it's, yeah, I appreciate that it exists, and that's the most I can probably say. If we were going to talk really quickly about trucks, there's actually, once again, you would think with this concept, there'd be a lot to talk about, but like I was saying, with how, like, in those moments when it was trying to do character work in Maximum Overdrive, and it's like, wow, I'm surprised how dull this insane movie can get. That's kind of the feeling for a lot of trucks, because we do have moments in here that we didn't quite see in Maximum Overdrive. They're interesting, like having a whole sequence devoted to a truck taking control of itself while somebody's driving it. And like when it like traps them in the back and stuff like that. That's something that's like, okay, I feel like we're, you know, doing a little something with the concept. And there's the it's fucking dumb also, but I respect the hazmat suit thing, where a hazmat suit fills itself and has an axe, and that's something. It's something that wasn't in Maximum Overdrive, and it took its own route with, so good for it, I guess. But the thing about it is, like, while you could see King attempting to do something with characters here, even if it wasn't working, there's just no interesting characters in trucks whatsoever. Like, not even, I want to say Timothy Busfield and, like, Brendan Fletcher, I think, are the only actors I even recognize in it. But none of the characters are memorable or interesting in any way whatsoever. And so there's a moment where it, like, you know, tries to embrace the ridiculousness, and we see a guy killed by a remote control car. We got a vibe of that in Maximum Overdrive when we saw the dog with the remote control car in its mouth. But this is like a full sequence of a guy being killed by a remote control truck hitting him repeatedly in the head. And with as much as I think Trucks is like this, it's a TV movie, but I think it like technically is PG-13, so it's like, it's a surprisingly brutal moment for a movie that's supposedly only PG-13, but still, it's not, I imagine they probably imagined something more visceral when they were writing it, and then it's like, oh, we've got a TV movie budget, and this concept, this is the best we can do. And they do talk of it, they play with, like, you know, what the origin of it all is, like, comets get brought up again, some people suggest that it's just random, there's a whole Area 51 thing that gets brought into it. But yeah, and it does bring in that bleak ending of the story, of King's story, where they get away in a helicopter, and then like the helicopter's flying itself, and it's like, oh, they're doomed. And the idea of making the end of the story feel doomed because of aircraft is kind of a nice callback to the story. But overall, it's just a boring version of Maximum Overdrive, so it's not really worth much of anything. But it did keep the title, so there is that. So I think that's all I have to say about all of these. So I think that wraps us up for King for this month. So we will continue. We're going to talk about a franchise over a few videos, and we've got a big thing we're doing on Halloween itself. And yeah, I think, since I'm shooting these all in advance, I don't remember, but we've got a few things after this, I believe. So until those and all of our award stuff that'll be coming up, I think that's it.